I always trusted my son-in-law until the day I realized my own company was being used against me. That phrase still echoes in my mind like a belated warning, a bell I only heard when the damage was almost complete. For years I told everyone that my family was my greatest asset, that nothing in the world made me happier than seeing each of them prosper by my side. My business started small, in a cramped room at the back of my house, and grew through sleepless nights, sacrifices, and difficult decisions. It was more than a company. It was living proof of my dedication. Therefore, opening the doors to my son-in-law seemed natural. After all, family is trust, or at least it should be. At first, everything seemed perfect. He was dedicated, helpful, and interested in learning every detail of how the company worked. He arrived early, asked many questions, offered improvements, and showed an enthusiasm that reminded me of my early years as an entrepreneur. I even felt proud, thinking I would finally have someone I could trust to continue my legacy. Stability seemed guaranteed, and I allowed myself to relax for the first time in decades. I thought I was preparing the ground for the future so that the company would continue to thrive when I was no longer at the helm. That's when the subtle signs began, signs so subtle that, at the time, they didn't make sense, but today they seem like cries that I inexplicably ignored. I remember the first time I met him on the phone, speaking, softly, almost whispering. When I entered the room, he quickly hung up and said it was a friend dealing with a personal matter. I didn't question it. After all, who am I to invade someone's privacy? Then came the documents that disappeared and reappeared in different places, the meetings scheduled without notifying me, and the insistent suggestions that I rest a little and leave some important decisions in his hands. At first, I convinced myself I was exaggerating. Maybe it was just the natural jealousy of a founder seeing someone else taking over something he'd always controlled alone. But the more time passed, the more I realized there was something more. It was his gaze, always overly attentive to what I signed. It was the way he spoke to suppliers using my name, as if he wanted to replace my image with his own. It was the way he tried to get close to key employees, offering advice and asking for opinions on how the company should be run. With each detail, a small discomfort grew, but I tried to ignore it. After all, he was my son-in-law, my daughter's husband, my grandson's father. It never crossed my mind that someone so close would be capable of harming me. But the truth has a cruel way of revealing itself, and when it wants to appear, it doesn't ask permission. Everything changed on a seemingly ordinary morning. I was in the office dealing with overdue paperwork when the accountant rushed in, sweating and visibly nervous. He held his laptop like someone carrying a bomb about to explode. I only realized the gravity of what was happening when I saw his face, white as a sheet. "Mr. Antonio, I think you need to see this." Those words were the trigger. He explained that he was preparing the quarterly reports and, by mistake, opened the wrong folder, a folder that, theoretically, shouldn't even exist in the company's files. Curiosity, mixed with a bitter premonition, made my heart clench. I asked him to show me. When the screen turned toward me for a moment, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It seemed too surreal, almost like a mistake, an absurd coincidence. Inside that folder were contracts I had never signed, transfer documents I would never approve, emails exchanged between my son-in-law and an unknown lawyer, discussing nothing less than the company's transition process, a transition in which he was the only one who knew nothing. The accountant tried to downplay it, saying it might be a draft, an innocent plan, but deeps down he already understood. And at that moment, I understood too. Everything I had noticed over the months, the hushed conversations, the suspicious decisions, the mysterious actions, it all fit together painfully. I was being removed from my own company, not by a competitor, not by a partner, not by someone distant, but by the man I had trusted as part of my family. A mixture of disbelief and indignation overwhelmed me. At the same time, I felt something akin to grief. It was like losing two things at once, my business and the confidence in my own home. But paradoxically, along with the pain came a strange feeling of relief. Finally, I had answers. Finally, what had been bothering me made sense. And the discovery didn't come from an investigation, nor from a complaint, but from a simple mistake, a wrong click of the meter. That was the beginning of it all. The moment I realized that the stability I believed I had was just a smokescreen, and that the greatest enemy, sometimes, isn't out there, competing in the market, but sitting at the table with you, smiling and saying they only want to help. When my son-in-law joined the company, it all seemed like a gesture of goodwill. He said he wanted to learn, that he wanted to help lighten my load, that he was willing to take on small tasks so I could rest more. At the time, I thought it was sweet. I thought it was affection. I thought it was gratitude for everything my wife and I did for him and our daughter. He always talked about growth, about modernization, about how the company had potential. And I, a man tired after so many years carrying the business alone, let myself be carried away by the idea that maybe it was time to start passing the baton. He approached slowly, with a rehearsed delicacy. First, he asked to attend meetings only as an observer. Then he started organizing spreadsheets to make my life easier. Over time, he began suggesting changes in the finance department, saying that everything would be more efficient. And I, blinded by trust and the hope of seeing the company prosper in the family's hands, gradually gave him space. That's how he gained access to areas I would never allow an outsider. And it's ironic to think that the more he said he wanted to learn from my experience, the more he acted in the shadows to erase my presence from the company. The hidden intention was there from the beginning, but it was so well disguised that even today I wonder how I didn't notice it sooner. His first maneuver was in the flow of internal documents. Without my knowledge, he began redirecting important files to private folders installed on his own personal computer. He created draft contracts, altered clauses, changed the names of those who should sign. Everything always seemed under review, under adjustment, in preparation. He was polite and convincing enough to transform each suspicious alteration into a gesture of care. Over time, I also discovered that he had begun contacting some of our biggest clients directly. He presented himself as the future manager of the company, implying that I was retiring, that I was tired, and that he would soon take over. His audacity was such that he even arranged meetings without informing me, making it clear to these people that I would only be a symbolic figure. And the clients, believing it was a planned transition, began to treat him as an authority. They had no reason to suspect anything. After all, he was my son-in-law, and I had never said anything to contradict that. With each step he took, I lost a little more ground. Everything happened so gradually that it seemed natural. What I didn't realize was that, while I rested trusting in someone from the family, he was working to definitively take my place. It was a silent, surgical takeover, done with patience and calculation. There was no explosion, no direct conflict, no confrontations. There was only a slow, almost imperceptible replacement, as if he were pushing me out of my own legacy without me realizing it. The first serious signs came when I noticed alterations to documents that I had never authorized. In a simple meeting with suppliers, I realized that some decisions were already approved and signed with my signature. At the time, I found it strange. I thought it might be an administrative error. But little did I know that my digital signature was being used by him to validate contracts and approve structural changes that I would never agree to. He had learned how the internal system worked too quickly, and without realizing it, I had allowed him total access to what should have been restricted. Emotional tension began to build within me. It was like carrying a constant weight on my chest, a vague feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was paranoia, that I was exaggerating. But every time he insisted I stay calm, that unease returned. It wasn't just the feeling of losing control. It was the feeling of being deceived by someone who shared the table with me on Sundays, who hugged my daughter, who held my grandson in his lap as if he were the most loving man in the world. What hurt the most was realizing that little by little he was steering the narrative to make me seem outdated. In meetings, he insinuated that my decisions were too old-fashioned, that I wasn't keeping up with market trends. He involved young employees repeatedly, saying they needed new leadership. And whenever I disagreed with something, he would make that face like he was trying to help, but that unfortunately I didn't understand. It was subtle, but devastating. It was the kind of emotional blow that silently undermines trust. The greatest betrayal, however, came when I discovered that several important decisions were already being made without my approval, but with my signature on them. When the accountant showed me the documents during the internal audit, I was completely paralyzed. There were modified contracts, altered clauses, and even proposals for the partial sale of the company to external groups, all approved by me. He had appropriated my authority, my name, and my corporate identity to pave the way to the top job. And while I was emotionally exhausted trying to understand what was happening, he continued with a calm smile, treating me like someone who needed rest, like a tired old man who no longer had the capacity to deal with complex matters. I was the founder, the man who built everything with his own hands, but I was being sidelined like an old ornament. The feeling of being betrayed within your own family is something I can't fully describe. It's as if the ground opened up and you didn't know whether to fall or remain still, waiting for the impact. It was at that moment that I realized it wasn't just ambition. It was a plan, a detailed plan, carefully prepared, executed with patience. He didn't want to help me. He wanted to replace me. And if it weren't for the accountant's mistake, perhaps he would have succeeded. The day everything came to light began like any other. The office was silent. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and I was focused on reviewing some old reports when I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. It was the sound of someone who didn't want to run, but also couldn't walk slowly. When the accountant entered, I immediately realized something was wrong. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly, and he held his laptop as if carrying a secret weighing tons. He tried to speak twice before managing to form a complete sentence. "Mr. Antonio, I think we need to talk. Now." At that moment, even before he turned the screen, I felt a discomfort in my chest. It wasn't fear, but a strange combination of foreboding and anxiety. He took a deep breath and explained that he was reviewing the quarterly reports when he accidentally opened a folder. A folder he didn't recognize, and that shouldn't have been there. A folder whose name seemed innocent, but whose contents were anything but. I clicked it by accident, and when I saw what was inside, he swallowed hard. I didn't know whether to close it or call you immediately. When I turned the laptop towards me, for a second my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. It was like looking into a parallel reality where I existed only as a name, a signature, a voiceless formality. Inside that folder were dozens of meticulously organized documents, too meticulous even. Each file was a piece of a perverse puzzle. Forged contracts with my digital signature copied on them, suspicious transfers directing funds to unknown accounts, settlement proposals that never reached my desk. There were even drafts of meeting minutes from meetings that never took place, but which outlined significant structural changes within the company. The most disturbing part, however, wasn't the forged documents. It was the email folder. When I opened the first message, a chill ran down my spine. There was my son-in-law's name, exchanging messages with a lawyer I'd never heard of. They spoke as if they were partners, as if everything was already decided, as if I were just a temporary obstacle that would soon be removed. One of the emails clearly stated, "As soon as he signs the final reports, we move on to the transition phase. He hasn't even realized he's already out of control." Another said, "The old man thinks he's still in charge. In a few weeks, everything will be in my name." Each word was like a punch to the gut. I remember feeling the ground disappear beneath me for a few seconds. The shock left me motionless, staring at the screen while my mind tried to piece together the emotional puzzle. Everything I had ignored, all the little suspicions, all the strange behaviors, it all materialized before me in a brutal way. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't exhaustion. It was betrayal. A calculated, silent, and cruel betrayal. Indignation followed soon after, burning inside. How could he have the nerve? How could he have been so cold-blooded as to plan something so big without showing any remorse? How many times did he sit at my table, smile at me, ask for advice, thank me for so much trust, while behind the scenes he plotted to tear me away from the place I had built with my own hands? And worst of all, how many times had I myself facilitated this, believing I was doing what was right for my family? Frustration hit me hard, too. I felt naive, vulnerable, exposed. I felt like I had failed myself and everything I had built. I wondered how I could have not noticed anything sooner, how I let him have access to so many documents, how I allowed him to participate in important decisions, how I signed reports without reviewing every detail. It was like reliving every mistake, every misplaced trust, every oversight, and realizing that all of this opened loopholes that he knew how to exploit masterfully. But amidst so many heavy emotions, something unexpected emerged. A strange, almost uncomfortable relief. It was painful to face the truth, but at the same time liberating. Finally, I had the answers. Finally, I knew I wasn't crazy, that this constant unease was justified. The truth was there, clear, objective, impossible to deny. And for the first time in months, I felt I had regained control, even if it was only control over my own narrative. Upon carefully reviewing the files, I realized the plan was far more advanced than I had imagined. He wasn't just trying to manipulate internal decisions. He was days, literally days, away from completing the fraud and taking control of the company. There were documents already scheduled to be sent to the bank, transfer requests marked for the following week, and even a detailed timeline written by him outlining the final steps of the power transition. At the top of the file, in bold letters, it read, Phase 3, Finalization. It was at that moment that it truly hit me. If the accountant hadn't clicked on the wrong folder, perhaps that same month, I would have woken up discovering that my company no longer belonged to me. Perhaps I would have become just a visitor, someone removed from my own story. What saved me wasn't a thorough investigation nor a planned audit. It was a mistake, a simple human error that brought down a castle of lies built over months. I looked at the accountant, who remained motionless beside me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. I didn't know if I should show it, but I thought it would be worse to hide it, he said, his voice trembling. I just shook my head, still unable to speak. There was nothing he could have done differently. That wrong click had changed everything, forever. At that moment, I understood that what came next would be difficult. There would be confrontations, tough decisions, possibly even irreparable, family losses. But one thing was certain, I was no longer in the dark. And for the first time in a long time, I had an advantage, because now I knew exactly who my enemy was and how close he had come to winning. After seeing everything in the folder, I needed a few minutes to breathe. It wasn't just about uncovering fraud, it was about discovering that someone you embraced as family was ready to destroy everything you'd built. But despite all the pain, I knew I couldn't act with my heart. That moment demanded strategy, composure, and precision. If I confronted my son-in-law impulsively, I might lose the only advantage I had, the element of surprise. I spent the entire night organizing each document, printing and cataloging everything as if I were preparing a lawsuit. I added dates, attached messages, created a detailed timeline, and noted every action he took without my permission. The more I reviewed, the clearer the extent of his cruelty and ambition became. There were two options. Either I ended it alone, which would be too risky, or I involved the right people. I chose the second option. The next day, I called an internal meeting with the company lawyer, the accountant, and two long-serving directors, people I trusted deeply. I explained everything, and with each document shown, I saw the astonishment growing on their faces. There was no doubt, no alternative interpretations, no way to justify the unjustifiable. It was fraud. It was misappropriation. It was a clear attempt at corporate fraud. As soon as I finished the presentation, the lawyer put his hands on the table and said, "We need to act before he makes the next decision. He's gone too far." And so we began planning the reckoning. The first step was to quietly remove his access to the system. I changed passwords, revoked permissions, and ordered the IT team to change all administrative logins without leaving any apparent trace, at least until the right time. Meanwhile, the lawyer prepared internals, notifications, and an official statement that would only be delivered at the exact moment of the decisive meeting. When I finally decided to call him, I made sure to act as if everything was normal. I invited him to a meeting about expansion and new opportunities. He came smiling, self-assured, imagining he had already won. Little did he know that this would be the last time he would enter that room as someone with access to anything. As soon as he sat down, I placed the folder of printed documents on the table. He tried to hide it, but the smile slowly faded. Before he could react, I pushed the first stack of papers toward him. "Do you recognize this?" I asked in a firm, controlled voice. He picked up the documents, tried to buy time by flipping through them, but soon realized there was nowhere to run. Each page was direct, clear, and irrefutable proof of the fraud he had orchestrated. When he looked up, there was no charm, no justification, no excuse. There was only fear, genuine fear. And that's when I understood. The trust I gave him, he used as a weapon against me. But at that moment, the tables turned. The lawyer entered the room, followed by the accountant. The son-in-law tried to stand up, but the lawyer asked him to remain seated. From then on, the conversation was direct and professional. We explained that all attempts to manipulate documents, forge signatures, and illegally move funds had been recorded. We informed him that he was officially removed from the company, with no right of access, no right to further arguments, and no future involvement. We gave him a formal notification and clarified that, should he attempt any retaliation, all evidence would be forwarded to the authorities immediately. The expression on his face changed several times: disbelief, anger, despair, humiliation. But there was no turning back. Every act he committed was documented. Every step of the plan was recorded. And above all, I wasn't alone. There were witnesses, documents, and professionals on my side. When he left the room, he slammed the door shut, but that was all he could do. In that instant, the company was protected. His access had been completely removed, and for the first time in months, I felt that crushing weight finally beginning to lift from my chest. But one battle remained, the family one. Telling my daughter was one of the most painful conversations of my life. She was in shock. She cried. She tried to understand. She tried to deny it. It's hard to accept that the person who shares your life with you is capable of something so cruel, and I, as a father, felt my heart break seeing the pain in her eyes. But she needed to know the truth, and I needed to protect not only my business, but also her future and my grandsons. Over time, the truth spread. The entire family was forced to face reality. It wasn't a matter of opinion, it wasn't gossip, it wasn't interpretation. It was documents. It was forged signatures. It was emails that proved his every intention. And faced with this, even those who doubted were forced to accept what happened. The company, now free from that silent threat, could finally breathe again. I reinforced internal protocols, implemented new layers of security, and reorganized entire departments to ensure that nothing similar could happen again. I discovered in practice the enormous value of keeping a business well-registered, documented, and regularly audited. Trust is important, but vigilance is indispensable. And above all, I learned that even within the family, it's necessary to maintain clear boundaries, especially when a lifetime's worth of assets is at stake. The thought that stuck with me is simple, yet profound. Never ignore that silent discomfort that accompanies you. It's almost always trying to warn you about something. Another valuable lesson is that, however painful it may be to discover infidelity, discovering it too late is infinitely worse. And however ironic it may seem, sometimes the truth arrives through the most unlikely means. Like an accountant opening the wrong folder at the exact right moment. If that click hadn't happened, I would have lost everything. My company, my livelihood, my legacy, my history. A simple mistake saved a lifetime of work. And that's what makes this story so important to share, because it shows that anyone, regardless of the size of their business, can become a target for someone overly ambitious. But it also shows that with organization, strategy, and attention to detail, it's possible to protect yourself and turn the tables before it's too late. In the end, what remained was a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness at realizing that someone so close tried to stab me in the back, but deep gratitude for having discovered the truth in time. And that's why I say, take care of your business, take care of your documents, review everything, trust, but not blindly. Because betrayal can come from where you least expect it, and protection always begins with information. If you enjoy true stories full of twists and turns like this one, please like, subscribe, and comment. I want the next story. This helps the channel a lot and motivates me to bring more content like this.